Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 105th episode of OD and Chill. We are broadcasting live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, basically everywhere. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments on whichever platform you're watching on. Today's episode is expected to be super actionable for whoever is watching. So anyone who's been in the marketing or e-commerce industry over the past 2 years has experienced how it's getting super expensive to acquire new customers from advertising platforms. And in essence, it boils down to just one thing, which is the quality of data that was available to marketing platforms before versus the quality of data that is available to them now. And therefore, it kind of translates into the way in which they can reach and target customers for you guys. So we're going to talk about why this is happening very briefly, but we want to spend maximum amount of time on actually talking about the components of a first party data strategy that you should be considering to be basically able to overcome all of this while using the stuff that you already own. So we're going to jump into the presentation. We have a few slides to show, but of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and we'll try and answer them as soon as possible or when relevant to the topic. So we'll just wait for the slides to come on. All right, so there we are. Our topic for today is unpacking a first-party data strategy. And our agenda is we're going to be talking about, firstly, why is advertising getting more expensive? What can we do about it? Then we are going to actually unpack a first-party data strategy for you, all the components that are involved in actually making use of your customer data. We'll summarize it in the end and also leave some time for questions and answers at the end. But of course, if you do have any questions in between, please feel free to drop them in the comments. So our host today is Sam, who's with me. Sam is our data and projects lead at Overdose. She's based in Auckland, but obviously she works with clients across the globe for Overdose. And myself, I'm Kaustubh Joshi. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Overdose, again, based out of Auckland, but managing and working with clients across the globe. So before we actually talk about the first-party data strategy, we need to know why we are here, what's happening in the industry, and why is it even relevant? Why is everyone talking about a first-party data strategy or first-party data in itself? So till date, the foundation of today's marketing world is based on third-party cookies and device identifiers. Now, third-party cookies, even if you don't know that technically, it doesn't matter what they are. Third-party cookies are just a device to fuel all of the audiences that you use in advertising platforms. So a third-party cookie, think of it as a little thing that persistently tracks you across all of your sites and apps so that it can build a profile of your interests. So if I purchase tennis shoes on site A, this third-party cookie from, let's say, Google is tracking me on that site and says that, oh, this person is interested in tennis shoes. Later, I go on and purchase something for my boy, let's say my son. The same third-party cookie from Google also knows that, oh, this person also seems to have a son. This way, they are building a profile of your interests, which eventually you use in your targeting and marketing. These third-party cookies are also responsible for mapping you to your specific accounts on your social media platforms. So when I go and purchase something, how do they know? How does Facebook know that it's KJ who has purchased something? Is because that third-party cookie is the link between my account on Facebook and what I did on a particular site. And lastly, third-party cookies also help you attribute conversions back to an ad. So obviously, you advertise to get outcomes, and a marketing platform should be able to measure what was the outcome, how many conversions did it bring for you. For that, it needs some kind of a device to be able to link a view of an ad or an engagement on ad to final conversions that might be happening on an app or a site. Third-party cookies are the link again. So sounds pretty cool, but third-party cookies in today's world of privacy are seen as sneaky devices. things that people don't really understand what's happening. They don't know that these third-party cookies exist. If you go into your Facebook app privacy settings, and if you look at the number of websites that it's tracked you today, you'll see that it's tracked every visit of yours to any website that you've visited in the past few days. Now, obviously, you never knew that Facebook, which is an app that you have an account on, is able to view, uh, you know, your activity across so many other websites that aren't related to Facebook at all. So that's the reason why third-party cookies and device identifiers are currently on shaky grounds. Um, a lot of private and public government regulations, as well as private industry actions, have taken place in the past 2 years. And third party cookies are being increasingly seen as bad tools to do the job. Apple released ITP 14 plus, like from the iOS 14, operating system till today. Uh, Apple has something called as ITP, which basically blocks all third-party cookies, which means it makes it super hard for marketing platforms to actually do what we were just talking about in the last slide. Same Apple ATT also is a very similar thing, but it does the same thing that ITP does, but in an apps world. Other privacy regulations like GDPR, CCPA, they do the same thing. They restrict how cookies are set on devices. Ad blockers are being used by users increasingly. And also, there's a lot of privacy first browsers that are coming into the foray. Things like Brave, the growth at which Brave browser is getting adopted is amazing. So people are becoming more and more aware about the fact that they need to protect their data and privacy from devices like third party cookies, which means obviously marketing platforms are no longer able to build good audiences. They are no longer able to find which users converted to the ads that were seen. That makes their job hard. That is why you're basically seeing what you're seeing, which is an increasing cost of acquisition. So everyone is talking about a cookieless future, and how 2024 is going to be the death of third party cookies. But in reality, it already exists today. Almost half of the traffic on the web, very approximately, is iOS devices. And third party cookies, anyways, do not exist as far as they are concerned. So whatever you're seeing is not a future, is the cookieless reality that's happening today. And the cost of this cookieless world, or the cost of user privacy, is pretty real. So here we've just mapped a study that we did on 100 plus accounts that we had access to, all normalized and obfuscated data. All of it, we basically measured one measurement, which is the cost per purchase. And what this chart tries to show is if an advertiser's cost per purchase was $1 in Jan 2021, it's now $2.1 in the month of June 2022, which means in just 18 months, the cost of advertising has more than doubled. And this cost is pretty much real. You're basically, if you spend the same amount of money, you get half as many customers as you used to get in Jan 2021. That's what basically it's saying. So how do we solve this? How do we make good out of this? What are the steps that we can take from our side as businesses, as merchants, to actually do the best possible for acquiring customers, give our ad platforms the best ability to perform well? So that's where we enter with a first party data strategy. Now those sound like like jargon, but in simple words, it's pretty straightforward. The idea is just know as many visitors as you can. You have several thousands of visitors coming onto your website every day. Try and identify who they are. Let them tell you who they are, rather than third party cookies trying to model and profile them. Once they tell you who they are, collect as much information on them as possible. Do you know their first name, their last name, their date of birth, their gender, and so on? Try and collect that data from them. Once you have this data, supercharge all of your advertising and marketing platforms with this rich information. Again, I will say in a privacy first manner, because obviously you want to make sure that you are consented to be using this data from the user. And what I mean by supercharged marketing platforms, we are going to talk about a lot of real examples today. Then the next step in a first party data strategy is also just using the data that you already have, even without doing anything new. Just your existing transactional data that you hold on your customers is a gold mine. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And then apart from advertising channels, there's a lot that you can do to actually take these opportunities to reach them via your own channels like email and marketing automation like SMS and stuff like that. So this is what we want to be doing in a first party data strategy. Now, this is easy to say, but it involves a lot of building blocks and components. So we will talk about each component and we'll unpack that for you. So building blocks, there are 6 building blocks to a first party data strategy. I've purposely just kept it so that there is some kind of fun element to it and you don't just read all of that in one go. The first thing that we're going to be talking about is consent. Now, the whole premise of us starting today is the fact that third-party cookies are considered to be sneaky. They're not the right way to track users. And we wouldn't be any different if we were collecting first-party data without the user's consent. And the first building block that you need to consider is making sure that you're going to collect a lot of data, but it's consented by the users. So how do we demonstrate the maximum amount of trust to a user the moment they arrive onto the website so that they consent us to collect more data? And you would think that implementing this means, oh, we are going to lose a lot of data because people will not consent. Yes, that's right. But consent does not necessarily mean no data or low data. You can optimize consent, and consent optimization is becoming a practice in itself. So you can optimize your consent via things like consent management platforms to make sure that you're still getting the maximum data that is possible from your users while giving them the choices. So to demonstrate this, Sam will jump in to show you a few examples of how we have one client where they had implemented a CMP and they were losing a lot of data because it wasn't really set up in the best way possible, and how that changed. Sam, over to you.
Cool. Thanks for that intro, KJ. So yeah, the first step here, you might think you've already got consent covered because you've got a consent management system already in place. What we've come to find with our experience in implementing these is that CMP implementations are actually very, very complex and that there are a lot of moving parts to them. So the very first step is making sure that your CMP is actually set up properly to avoid losing valuable data. So in this slide, you can see one of our clients who had a CMP install, but they had actually been unintentionally blocking many users by default due to improper configuration. And you can see as soon as we corrected this, indicated by the red arrow, the number of users being tracked in analytics has actually grown by, double or even triple in some cases. So what had actually gone wrong in this client's case was that they hadn't realized the implications of setting a default consent status. So what I mean by this is that the default consent status that will allow you to maximize your data is called opted in by default. So I've got an example here from the Samsung website. Note that this is a cookie notice rather than a proper consent banner, but it demonstrates this idea of opt-in by default, where you can see as soon as you land on the site, cookies have been granted access and your data is being collected. Whereas on the other hand, for EU countries which are subject to GDPR, the default consent status should be opted out by default. So here I've got an example from the Coke website where we can see that only the necessary cookies categories is active by default. If a user wants to give additional consent for marketing, analytics, or personalization cookies to be used, they actually have to explicitly opt into those. Otherwise, they will be blocked by default. So going into an example of consent optimization done well, I've got an example here from the Adidas website. So this shows how we can encourage users to give us their consent. So firstly, it explains what each cookie type is used for so that it's clear to a user what is being done with their data. It's not just some mysterious kind of black box being sent out. We don't know what's being done with it. They've actually explained exactly what is being done with a marketing cookie, what is being done with an analytics cookie, for example. Secondly, the accept all cookies CTA is very, very distinct. So users who aren't overly concerned about their data are actually much more likely to click it out of habit. It has the ability to personalize choices if a user wants to opt out of a particular cookie type. The reject all CTA is still visible because we have to respect users' choices, but it is out of the way in the top right corner. Remember, we want to minimize the chances that the user actually selects this option, but it's legally still very important to have that present. And lastly, it actually fills the whole screen and blocks the website. Now, from a design perspective, that might not be the best, but in terms of consent optimization, that is actually very important for EU countries. As like I said on the previous slide, their default consent status is going to be opted out. So by forcing the user to actually make a choice, we're actually maximizing the chances that we could get their consent and start tracking their data. On the flip side, here we have an example from Strava, which has not been optimized for consent. Firstly, the cookie banner is very, very discreet. So you can see it there in the bottom left corner. It's against that black footer, so it's not actually apparent that there is a cookie banner in the first place. A user can actually continue browsing the site without giving explicit consent either way, as it's not interfering too much with that overall site experience. Like I said, in the EU, this can have a huge impact on the data you're actually collected, as even users who might have given consent, if forced to make a choice, aren't giving it if it's not interfering with their experience. Secondly, there are only two choices. You can either accept all cookies or you can reject all cookies. This alienates any users who wish to customize the cookies they grant access to. So for example, we might have a user who doesn't mind their data being used for analytics purposes, but doesn't want it to be used for marketing. Here, this user would not be given that choice to customize which ones they give access to. So their only option would be to reject all and we lose their data altogether. And thirdly, equal weighting is being given to both the reject all and accept all CTAs. Given this presentation, it's very likely that a user will just click reject, even if they don't actually mind their cookies being used. Cool. It's important to note that if you're a website that operates across different markets, that you don't have to select just one default consent status for all of those markets. You can actually set a different default status for each one. And it's important to make sure that you're optimizing for each geolocation. So make sure that your CMP is set to use the appropriate default consent status for each market. And we recommend that you only use opted out as the default consent. You only use opted in for markets like the EU, which are subject to GDPR. So it's clear that with third-party cookies becoming increasingly targeted, that solutions like data modeling will actually have to rise up to fill these gaps, since we can't observe all users. So Google have actually already started rolling this out with a feature called Google Consent Mode, and that allows non-consented data to be sent over to Google servers anonymously. So this data is then used to create a model specific to your business and your website so that you can see what data might have looked like if all users had consented. Note that there are certain thresholds that need to be met. Basically, there has to be enough data for Google to sufficiently train the model before this data is added to your reports. So that's a certain amount of consented data and a certain amount of unconsented data. Once the model is created, the data is blended alongside your observed data in platforms like GA4 and Google Ads. So it's important to note that while at the moment, Having a CMP may mean losing some of your data for the users who do not consent. In the future, it will actually be the opposite. We can see here that platforms are actually evolving to fill those gaps, and it's very important to start collecting that unconsented data now in order to enrich your reports in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. So that brings us to the second block of the first party strategy. So the reason why we spent so much time on consent is because the last thing that we want is to implement all the other blocks and ignore consent, because then you're doing the same thing that brought us here in the first place. So now that we have permission from the users to collect their data, the second thing that we want to do is get them to identify themselves, because till now they've just given us permission. We want to know who they are, what's their email address, what's their first name, what's their last name, and so on. Now, you'll know that typically these kind of details are provided by users only when they are checking out or when they are purchasing, which is pretty late in the journey, right? And our intent is to know who these customers are as early as possible in the journey, so that we can use that data to help our marketing channels, to help our advertising channels, to help our own channels, and so on. So what is the value proposition that we can have as a business? Now, this is not a tech area at all. This is purely business logic, which is what is the value proposition that we should be offering to our customers so that they feel incentivized enough to identify themselves on every visit, on every engagement with us. So again, Sam will bring in a couple of examples on this.
Cool. So a very, very common one is actually monetary incentives. So providing some sort of discount to users who are signed in. So on this website, you can actually see that there is a special members only deal that is only available if you're signed in. So users are actually encouraged to sign up and identify themselves in order to see what that deal is. There's that added layer of mystery that you don't actually know what it could be. It could be a really awesome deal, but you don't know unless you sign up. So alternatively, you could offer an experience-based incentive. So here on the Sephora website, they encourage users to sign up to become a member in order to access exclusive sales and events, and also to unlock product recommendations personalized to them. So it's important to think about what would appeal to your specific customer base and incentivize them to sign up with you.
Awesome, short and sweet. So now we've come to the third block, which is we've got people to give us permission. We've given them enough reasons for them to tell us who they are. Now, how do we make use of this information? For which we need to bring some tech perspectives. And that's where we come to our third block of the first party strategy, which is the tech stack itself. Now, this might seem like you need to invest a lot of money at this layer, but it does not necessarily mean that. Yes, this is the layer at which a lot of investment can be put in, but it can start as simple as what I'm going to show you, which is a person who has just signed up because they wanted to see that member deal or they wanted personalized recommendations. Now, how do we remember and persist that data for the times to come? Because a user may not always sign in every time they visit your website. They've told you who they are. Now, that is where we bring in perspectives or approaches where we persist first-party behavioral data or first-party customer data into first-party cookies, as long as they've consented us to do so. Now, here you're seeing cookies like the country, zip code, last name, first name, email address, city, whatever they've provided you, being persisted in the user's browser as a first-party consented cookie, which means that in the next visit, if they are not signed in, we still know who this person was with our information that we own on the customer. Now, how do we use this? That is where we can start supercharging all of our marketing platforms. So in the background, I had talked about how marketing platforms and ad platforms are finding it hard to match events with real people. They're finding it hard to identify who this person is. But if we fill in that missing gap by telling the marketing platform that, hey, this person who just added to cart is actually KJ, he's based in Auckland, this is his first name, his last name, and so on. That is what is this advanced match data. Now, most advertising and marketing platforms have the ability to accept your first party data as advanced matching signals so that they can do a better job. And they really do a better job. If you see these examples of Facebook, just because first party data is being sent, it's saying that, oh, 160% higher attributed conversions because of the first party data that you're sending. Similarly, Google Ads has something called as enhanced conversions, where it's able to accept your first party data. And it's saying that, oh, for all the video campaigns, Google Ads was able to attribute 33% more conversions. And for Search Network, it was able to attribute 9% more conversions, just because you were able to provide them with additional data. Now, more data means better audience matching, better audience profiling, and it also means better attribution. Better attribution means they can attribute more conversions to themselves, which means better modeling, because eventually every marketing platform works on modeling, where it tries to identify, based on past conversion data, who are the best people who are likely to convert. So the more conversion data a marketing platform has, the better it can do at reaching other newer audiences that it feels are similar to these people who converted. Then we come to the next layer, which can be obviously a likely cost, but it is something which is a differentiator today, but it is going to be a must have tomorrow. And this is something called as a customer data platform. Now, the entire purpose of a customer data platform is identity resolution and audience matching. So a customer data platform essentially connects to a lot of data sources. They can be your e-commerce website, they can be your ERP or POS. Maybe you are a multi-channel business and have store data as well, where customers have their email address and customer IDs. Your web data stream for events that are actually happening on your site, and you might have other data sources as well. So a customer data platform basically keeps tracking all of this customer data from multiple sources, anonymous and known customers, and keeps building a profile, what they call as a single customer view. And this is a game changer, because the customer data platform is not just an insight platform. It doesn't just tell you that, oh, this is how your customers look, but it plays the linking role between all of this awesome customer data and your downstream marketing or marketing platforms. So I can basically create simple drag and drop audiences of people whom I want to target, and then push those audiences based on that first party data that I own to multiple marketing platforms, things like Google Ads, Facebook, Bing, Google Shopping, and whatnot. I can basically push audiences in sync, so that we are talking when we are saying the right things to the right people at the right time across all of our platforms. And that is where a customer data platform is something that needs to be on your roadmap if it is not already. Um, Having said that, there is always more that you can do with your existing stack as well. Most people think that first party data is email address, but it's not. Email address is just the start, and you should be doing a lot more on that. The moment you get a new customer order, or let's say a new customer subscribes, if they are subscribed to the email, of course, this is what all brands do, which is send them a default welcome email. Great. That should be just the starting point. Wait for 2 days and send them something like a let us know you better email, which is just an email for them to tell you who they are, what their interests are. And if you don't give them a reason to do so, they are not going to respond to that email. But if you give them enough reason with some incentives for them to identify themselves more, they will do so. So try and gather things like what's their date of birth, what's their gender, what are the other preferences related to your business, and that is basically what you have to kind of loop through to make sure that you're not just collecting first party data at the start, but are continuously enriching it. If they don't engage, you can have like a follow-up series that gives us more incentives, things like, hey, oh, you didn't respond to this, why should you give us more details? Oh, that's because you get a free voucher on your birthday, you just need to let us know your date of birth. Give them reasons to do so, and that will basically allow you to have as much data, which then you will be using in your downstream marketing channels when they do come and sign in or sign up onto your website. All right. So that is three building blocks covered. Now we are on the fourth building block. So we have the tech stack now that allows us to know who our customers are. And if we have a CDP, we also have a single customer view, which is amazing. And now we are able to push audiences across all the platforms to do great marketing campaigns. But the question is that once you implement these things that I spoke about in the tech stack, that's not done yet, because now you need to understand, what do I do with all this data that I'm collecting? That's where we come into the next layer, which is the insight layer, trying to find the opportunity buckets that exist based on the awesome customer data that we've collected so far. There's a gold mine within your e-commerce data today. Even if you don't collect anything more, you will be surprised to know that on an average, across all of the BI implementations that we've done for our clients, the one common thing that we see is the massive proportion of first-time churn customers that exist in everyone's e-commerce database. First-time churned customers are people who have purchased with you. You've done all the hard work to acquire them, but have never come back to purchase with you again. Now, on an average, this screenshot is for a business whose first time churn is 77%, which means 77 out of 100 customers who have purchased with you never come back to purchase again. Wouldn't you want to know why that happens? All it needs to do is send a survey. Even if 10% of those churn customers respond back on why they didn't purchase, you have a gold mine of insights. Secondly, you can just try and reactivate them. It will be far cheaper to gain a customer whose data you already have, rather than try and acquire a fresh new customer by spending new marketing money. So these are the kind of insights that you should be using for once you have the tech stack layer figured out. Things like, what are your customers truly worth? People go by, oh, my cost of acquiring customer is $40 and my average order value is $100, so that's not very profitable. But what if you knew that on an average your customers are way more valuable, that over a 12-month period every customer is worth $500 or $430 more? The way you would think about your acquisition would completely change. What if you knew things like, oh, who are my churn customers, who are my customers who are due for a repurchase, and so on? The way you would act on that data that you already own today is going to be completely different. So remember that using first party data does not need massive investments. You already have a lot of gold mine worth of information that you can start activating right away. That brings us to the next part, which is, all this insight will tell you where the opportunities live. Now we need to activate them. I've just talked about ideas that, oh, my first time churning customers, I need to activate them or send them a survey. But how do we do that? This has to be simple enough, or this has to be seamless enough to be able to do that. That's where we bring in the activation strategy. And Sam will talk about this. Sorry, the content is a bit small, but it's just for illustration purpose. Sam will talk through that.
Cool. So basically, what you want to do at this stage is turn those insights into an actionable plan. And the easiest way to do that is to present it in a matrix format like what we've got here. So here we've actually split users into cohorts based on their transaction history and their activity level. And you can actually see, by doing this, you can actually see where your biggest opportunities lie. If you have a CDP, this data will be easy to get. If not, you can use BI reports to obtain this. By actually breaking up your larger cohorts into smaller ones like this, it becomes easier to create specific strategy and tactics that will actually resonate with that cohort. So for example, if we take the first time purchases row there, if we have a look at the healthy section, we can actually see that our specific strategy there should be to collect more first-party data on these users. They've already purchased with us one time and we want to try and retain them. So think about how you could do that. Some specific tactics you might use are sending out a survey or incentivizing them to share reviews on social. And then also think about what channels you will actually use to achieve those. Whereas a first-time purchaser that has churned, your strategy is going to be very different. And for example, your primary focus might be getting more insights into why they have churned, which you might do through an email that a survey that you send out via email, and then also trying to reactivate them. So maybe sending them out an offer to entice them to come back. Yeah, so once you have your cohorts in place, it's actually a lot. If you have CDP, it's going to be very easy to set up automated marketing flows for each of them across multiple channels. So many businesses implement a CDP simply for the single customer view, rather than changing their business processes and using it to talk to the right customers at the right time with the right channel. So I've got a simplified example here, which is just taking an abandoned cart example. So breaking down our cohorts into customer type, whether they are returning or a new customer. So for a new customer, I might retarget them on Facebook and Google Ads, wait 24 hours, and then send them a discount code for their first purchase, assuming that they had entered their email address before leaving the site. However, for a returning customer, which I had a lot more first-party data for, I could start with a standard abandoned checkout flow, following that up after 24 hours with an SMS reminder. If there's still no purchase 24 hours after that, what I could do is actually add them to a remarketing audience on Facebook and Google Ads. Knowing that these were returning customers who have purchased before and were interested enough to return and browse the site again, I can then actually optimize this specific campaign towards them using features like remarketing lists for search ads, or even increase that budget, knowing that they are qualified leads who are much more likely to convert than a standard user. Cool.
Cool. So that's the activation strategy layer. In summary, it is, have you thought about how you're going to use all of that insight that you have from all of the awesome first party data that you've been collecting, and make sure that you can orchestrate it across multiple channels in full sync. That brings us to the last building block, which is zero party context. Now, zero party context doesn't sound like first party at all, but zero party context is a level beyond first party, which is collecting data from customers with their complete from their own feedback, which is asking customers for data and they give you that. Things like surveys are examples of zero party context. And the reason why this is important is because the data that we collect is all quantitative data. It's still numbers in tables, right? And it's all subject to interpretation. So the way I would interpret my cohorts and the actions that I need to take on them may be different from the way somebody else, say Sam, would interpret those same cohorts and the actions that she thinks we should be taking. And there's no right or wrong, but what we do need is some additional context, a feedback loop from our customers to identify whether what we are doing, is it right or is it wrong. And that's where you'll see a lot more brands have started doing a lot of surveys across the purchase journey, post purchase. Even Google, for example, if you look at Google's documentation for any kind of purposes, you'll see that they have started asking a lot of survey questions themselves. And what are the examples in which this can be valuable? Is simple things like closing the attribution question. A lot of questions are around, hey, where do my customers actually get influenced? Why do they purchase with us? Where do they come from? Just ask them on the order success page, which is, hey, for this purchase, where did you get influenced? Was it a post or ad on Facebook? Did you watch a video on YouTube? Did you just come because you received a discount email? Whatnot. You'll be surprised that almost 40 to 50% of your customers who purchase are more than happy to give you a response to this. And that big a sample is easily representative of your population. And if you realize, once you start doing this, the insight that this will give you will be way different from the insight that you had from something like a Google Analytics. Google Analytics, Facebook ads, Google ads, each have their own attribution mechanisms, and they're taking the best approach to tell you what works and what does not. But who's better to tell you what works and what does not than your customer? If 45 to 50% of your customers can tell you where they get influenced, isn't that a gold mine of data for you to know my cohort strategy? Where should I be activating? Which channels should I be sending things on? Because people tell me that they are actually getting influenced on Facebook. There are so many examples where we've implemented this for clients through our BI processes, and the insight that they received here was way different from what they were seeing in Google Ads, and that just gave them the confidence to invest more in some channels that they thought were working but weren't being able to prove their worth. And this just proves worth for any channels that are typically at the top of funnel, which are difficult to quantify in terms of their success. Things like experimental channels. Let's say you start spending 5% of your advertising budget on TikTok, and you want to know whether anyone is getting influenced on TikTok. What better way than just asking customers whether you got influenced on TikTok? Other things that you can get from customers are things like, what can we do better? We spend so much time going through session recordings trying to find where the friction points are in a website, and that is all important. But even if you get 100 responses from your customers in an entire month telling you what you can do better, that's so much rich information for you to act. Things like knowing why do customers churn. If you were buying, let's say this is an example supplement store, uh, it just says, hey, we were excited to have you as a customer, but we noticed you never purchased again. Do you not buy supplements anymore? Did you switch to another brand, or do you buy our product from another reseller? If they say I switched to another brand, then check, oh, why did you we can still learn a thing or two. Why did that happen? I didn't like your product. You got better delivery from somewhere else, etc. Try and understand what your customers have to tell you, and it's not that big a gap. We have the right kind of platforms and super cost effective platforms for you to be able to bridge this gap pretty quickly. It's just about having the time to actually go through all of these layers that we've just spoken about and thinking about where we stand in terms of the strategy for each of those layers, and then identifying where the gaps are and filling them in. That is pretty much the summary for today, which is first party data strategy is actually not just about implementing one CDP or a tech platform. It's a lot beyond that. It involves things like consent, your business proposition to your customers, a tech stack, the ability for you to go through some change management within your organization to actually start making use of those insights and change the way you activate customers, and also have a very holistic zero party strategy to keep listening to your customers. That's all of the building blocks of a first party data strategy. And yeah, we are open to questions now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them into the comments. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes. All right, so looks like we have no questions. Probably the right time to wrap up then. But of course, we are always available on all of the social media channels for Overdose. Hit us up on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions post this presentation as well. Thanks for your time for whoever who was watching, and hope you had a great time listening to this, and have a good weekend.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Hope you